It is a wonderful privilege to welcome and introduce our three panelists this afternoon. Each of them will bring profound wisdom to the table as they share on compassion fatigue. I would like to invite our panelists to switch on their cameras now. Mrs. Bev van Rensburg, Dr. Shaun Joynt, and Professor Nicolene Joubert. As they switch on, I will just share briefly on each one of our panelists. Mrs. Bev van Rensburg holds an MTH in Practical Theology, Children in Crisis, and has over 20 years of experience lecturing in pastoral counseling. She specializes in trauma training through LAM International, focusing on child trauma care, carer competency, and secondary trauma. Bev has delivered trauma and carer competency training in South Africa, abroad, and online since 2015. She has also published youth discipleship books and articles, including Where Are You, Father? And Destined for Pure Love, available on Reformer Global. Bev is married to Dr. Ruben van Rensburg, and they have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Welcome, Bev. We are so excited to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you. It's a joy to be with you.
And then Dr. Shaun Joynt. He's a lecturer at the University of South Africa and a postgraduate supervisor at the South African Theological Seminary. He holds a PhD in Practical Theology from the University of Pretoria. Dr. Joynt has been in pastoral ministry for more than 20 years, serving in rural, online, and mega church contexts in the areas of pastoring, worship leading, youth ministry, children's ministry, and missions. He has a passion for clergy well-being and completed his doctorate on the topic of why clergy leave full-time ministry. He has published on church leadership, clergy in film, clergy calling, clergy conflict, social transformation, religious and spiritual struggles, human flourishing, digital ecclesiology, and forgiveness research from a positive psychology perspective. Welcome, Dr. Joynt. We are looking forward to hearing from you this afternoon. Our third panelist, Prof. Nicolene Joubert. She is a Christian psychologist and trauma therapist. She holds a PhD in psychology and is currently an associate professor of Christian psychology at Houston Baptist University in Houston, Texas. She teaches various courses in Christian psychology and counseling there. She is also the founder and head of the Institute of Christian Psychology in South Africa, now the Institute for Christian Practitioners. Welcome, Prof. Joubert. We are truly grateful that you could join us after all the struggles with technology and all the way from Texas. Welcome. So we are going to kick off our discussion this afternoon with you, Professor Joubert. And we would like to ask you, when we say compassion fatigue, it sounds like we're saying our compassion is tired. Please, can you share some insights with us on what compassion fatigue is?
Thank you. Adelette, for that introduction. Can you all hear me? Yeah, you can hear me. Right, good. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm so sorry I cannot join through my computer with the audio. Fortunately, my webcam is working. Yes, compassion fatigue. It sounds like that our compassion is tired, but I really want to explain what it means. The term was coined by Figley in 1995, and it was to describe the phenomenon of stress resulting from exposure to a traumatized individual rather than the trauma itself. And I think that's really important for us who are in the helping field, helping traumatized people to realize that listening to severe trauma can affect us emotionally. And that's where compassion fatigue comes in. So it is an extreme state of tension. It's not just tiredness. It is an extreme state of tension and preoccupation with the emotional pain and physical distress of another person, of those being helped. And it causes a negative shift in worldview and self identity. So it is a serious condition when it develops, and it has to be treated with care from other caregivers. It's because we provide compassionate care. So it can also lead to secondary traumas, traumatic stress, which you will hear more about later, and or burnout, but it's not the same. It's often used synonymously, but it's not the same because the cause of it is different. The cause is, it lies in our ability to show compassionate care. And that's why we then develop compassion fatigue. So it's when a person gets overwhelmed by the trauma they are witnessing on a daily basis, on or regular basis, and they show empathy, empathy and compassion, which means that we actually come alongside somebody, we feel their pain, and that can lead to getting very stressed ourselves because we feel the pain. It can also deplete our ability to cope with everyday obligations. So that exposure to patients or clients with severe trauma, and especially when we also listen to graphic details of the trauma, can lead to those feelings of tension or helplessness or anxiety in us as caregivers. And that then leads to the feelings of being fatigued or being not able to show empathy and being very stressed. And we'll speak more about the signs and symptoms as we go along in this discussion.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. Joubert. Yes, I can just envision, it's like all your compassion has just run out and there's just nothing left. Bev, may I ask you, when does compassion fatigue occur specifically?
You know, I would say that it's when our hearts are too affected by whoever we're caring for. And my deepest concern through this whole compassion fatigue is where we are rendered weak or useless because we're so hurting ourselves. And so we've got to develop resilience. I'm going to just stick up something next to my face. ABC. We've got to be aware of our condition, our need for restoration, a balance in our life. We've got to have lots of fun and lots of friendships and all of that sort of thing to help us to cope, and in connections, which we'll talk about later also. And if you add the three together, awareness, balance, and connection, we become more resilient. So what are those wins? I would say when we're dealing with children especially, because their trauma, especially abuse, hits us very hard because they are captive in their own homes often. If it's a primary caregiver that's causing the trouble, if there's a disparity between our expectations and our work, and that's what I'm going to deal with later because I feel it's a heart issue. Sometimes we've got compassion fatigue, but when other people don't understand, it gets much worse. We are hurting, it's double hurt. When there's a mismatch between our perception as a helper and the client's view of us. In other words, they're expecting far more contacts and all that sort of thing. And we've got to protect ourselves. We've got to have definite times where we communicate, but they've got to know that we care. And we can even go into denial. If a trauma is bad enough, that's when it hits us very hard because we are not prepared to really see that people are human, and sometimes there are severe atrocities that happen. And for us to be there, to be good listeners, is major. If there's a fatality in a family, but especially a child, that's when it hits us very hard. And we feel powerless. But there's nothing like showing a bit of love and just being there in the gap, even if there's not much to say, just an arm around the person. It damages us a lot if we're in the same community as where the trauma occurs, because a whole lot of people are affected, and we might meet the parent or the child or whoever on a fairly regular basis. Very important is unresolved personal trauma. We need healing ourselves, but we've got to analyze to see where we are. Information overload. There are times when a person can just open up too much, or they get very exhausted. For example, in trauma incident reduction, they can be so fatigued themselves that they can't even get through unloading some of the anxiety that they're feeling, and they've got to be able to do that and sort out their coding because they're in shock. Another serious thing, and I want to talk about colleagues here, compassion fatigue and colleagues, is where we feel there's a high level of scrutiny, public scrutiny, or a high level of accountability. So all of these things, a mismatch between our experience in life and what our client is looking at. And this is where we've got a big advantage, because as Christians, we can point to our healer, the Lord, and pray for the person. And that's beautiful. And especially if they know the Lord themselves, they can recognize that He's the way for final healing. Thanks. That's from me.
Thank you so much, Bev. Yeah, it seems like compassion fatigue starts like a little thing, and we shove it down, or we think, it's not that bad. And then it starts accumulating. It affects us as a human, all the facets of our lives, and then it even circles out to those around us. It's so interesting. Dr. Nicolene, can I ask you again the next question? Who is susceptible, and what are the signs? Because we've heard now, how it can start, and it sounds to me like anybody can get to a point of being compassion fatigued. Am I correct, or is it specific groups of people?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I think there are groups of people that are more susceptible, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And also the signs. How do we notice that somebody has compassion fatigue, or how do we notice it in ourselves? Some people are more susceptible, those that are in professional occupations dealing with trauma or emergency care, or those that do community service work, or even people in the mission field. If you're in the mission field and you deal with refugees, for example, there's a constant exposure to trauma narratives that are quite huge and almost outside of the control. Well, it is outside of the control of the caregiver. If it's political or it's war related, it becomes very big. And I'll also speak about that later, the global compassion fatigue. But on a personal level, people that are working in the field of trauma on a consistent level and are exposed to severe trauma regularly are more susceptible. People that provide compassionate care, so they are compassionate, they are empathetic, and they show the love and care. They are open to the pain of others. They tend to be more susceptible. There are factors that we can add to that, such as personal trauma. Bev mentioned that. If you have a personal trauma in your past, you become a higher risk for compassion fatigue. Lifestyle factors can play a role. So if it's somebody that doesn't maintain healthy self-care strategies or eating habits, or like you said, we just push it down. No, it's nothing. We must be strong. If we develop that mindset that we have to be there for everybody, that's a factor that will put people at risk. So it makes you more susceptible. And if there's countertransference, so if there's identification with the pain of the client, but to the degree that you yourself, as the helper or the caregiver, becomes overwhelmed, and you become almost passive or hopeless, you feel hopeless, then that is you can be of less help when you identify to that level, and you will develop compassion fatigue. So countertransference is definitely a cause of CF. Something that we need to mention with compassion fatigue is the concept of compassion satisfaction, which means that we find joy in showing compassion to others. We find joy in helping others. And with colleagues, you feel you contribute to the good of the greater society. So if you experience that emotion, or that if you have that experience of satisfaction with what you do, even if the circumstances are not very good, the work circumstances, people will not develop compassion fatigue, but that's a buffer against it. I want to say something about long-term effects, short-term and long-term effects, because I think it's really important. Short-term effects include physical illnesses, like I think people will be able to identify with this, like diarrhea, headaches, migraines, backache. And then long-term, it can lead to more serious physical illnesses, like even like diabetes, ulcers, cardiovascular diseases. So I think it's a condition that we should really pay attention to as Christians, and be prepared to help colleagues that suffer, that experience this. The signs include negative behavior that's noticeable, like anger or exhaustion or irritability. So if you become irritable about certain clients, or if you start to dread certain situations that you must deal with, trauma situations, then that's a sign of fatigue. And we can even diagnose ourselves if we self-aware and we know the symptoms. So people that start to feel a reduced sense of sympathy or empathy, that, or numbness, that's a sign. Other signs in the workplace include that people taking leave often, so there's a high absenteeism. People change jobs, or they are sick, they take time off sick. So, and in a workplace, this is what I really want to emphasize, because it can affect churches or Christian organizations. So in a workplace, when somebody has compassion fatigue, it does affect colleagues. People will notice this, colleagues, clients will notice and get concerned. And colleagues, Bev also mentioned colleagues might not really understand what's going on, or know how to respond to another colleague suffering from compassion fatigue, but that can change or influence a job environment or a practice culture, which is it. That's why it's so important that we should notice this, and provide some support for colleagues, and know and understand how to support them. So
Actually,
I
Dr.
think the
Joubert, yeah,
signs
thank you
are
for
there,
that.
they're very
Yeah.
noticeable in terms of what I mentioned, and we will speak more about how to support or how to help a person that suffers from compassion fatigue. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's such a serious condition, actually. As you were talking, I'm just reminded of what an integral human being is, so holistic. It literally affects all the aspects of your life. And I'm reminded of a friend of mine who's an ER doctor. And at one point, she just came to work and she looked at this person who had been in an accident. And she was just like, take him away. He's going to be dead in about 10 minutes. Let's go. Who's next? And at that moment, she realized, oh my goodness, something is really seriously wrong. I've just lost that caring capacity. I'm just numb. And this is so serious. Dr. Shaun, I'd like to ask you about vicarious trauma. How does CF relate to vicarious trauma?
Thank you, Idalet, and good to be here with my colleagues. Well, maybe just a step back. I was thinking of compassion, the word compassion, and it reminded me of the word comfort. Now, the word comfort is from two Latin words, cum and forte, and you as a musician will know that forte means strength, strong. So comfort means to come alongside someone with strength. And now the same with compassion. It's to cum, to come alongside, and passio, or with their suffering. So when we speak of the passion of the Christ, we are not talking about what he's passionate about, the will of the Father. We're talking about his suffering. So when we talk about compassion, that's what we're understanding, the coming alongside in someone else's suffering. So now the difference between compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma is they're actually very closely related concepts. And they often occur together in individuals who care for others who are experiencing suffering. So as we've heard before, compassion fatigue is that emotional, physical exhaustion. You're caring for people on a regular basis. It's prolonged exposure to the suffering of others. Whereas vicarious trauma is more psychological phenomenon that occurs when a person experiences trauma indirectly by hearing about or witnessing the traumatic experiences of others. So while compassion fatigue is a broader term, encompassing both emotional and physical exhaustion, amongst other things, vicarious trauma specifically refers to that psychological impact of witnessing or hearing about the trauma. Now, there are key similarities, three of them. Both of these involve exposure to the suffering of others. Both can lead to emotional distress, anxiety, depression. Both can affect a person's ability to function effectively. Key differences is that vicarious trauma is more specifically focused on that psychological impact of witnessing the trauma, whereas compassion fatigue is a broader term that also includes physical exhaustion, also contributing, and there's a lot of interplay between these, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, PTSD, and burnout, but they have different sources and different exhibiting symptoms, yes. That's the word I'm looking for. But often there's an overlap between them. So basically, as Prof. Joubert said, overlapping symptoms for compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma is emotional exhaustion, difficulty sleeping, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and then also both the impact of the person's well-being. It can have a negative impact on their mental and physical health. So they closely related, but they're not the same thing.
Yeah, thank you so much for clarifying that, Dr. Shaun. You know, the aspects of how it affects you psychologically, emotionally, physically, is just so, it sounds so dangerous. And we need to address this. But how? So Bev, if you can keep it to 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to check you on that, because there is so much to share. But on what can we do? How can we help someone heal from compassion fatigue? Can you tell us a little bit of what does the recovery look like? What can it look like? Just unmute yourself. Sorry, Bev, you are muted. Thank you.
I'm going to expose you to Fresh Start for All Nations.org. It's a life thing for me, because I've seen huge healing from people downloading the book PTIOYH, which you'll see, the link will be in the chat box. But it's because it's like a journal where you go through these processes, and I'm going to give you a quick example. All right, I'm going to do a hurt, offense, loss, or hurt. Try and think of one, but I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to take a hurt. In your organization, your caring organization, suddenly somebody's lost trust in you after years because you made a decision to care, which they don't understand. How's it affected you? This book will give you lots of emotions that you can circle. For example, I feel deflated. I feel I've lost my confidence. I'm having sleepless nights. I'm feeling inferior. I'm feeling unenthusiastic to continue. And then the next one is response. What is your response going to be? Well, in this particular case, the person feels, I don't know how to win back the trust. They have misunderstood. I need an advocate. I need somebody to say, I know why she did what she did. Would you please put Jesus in the gap? Would you analyze your bad experiences and see what God would have wanted? And then, would you consider then going to the healer? Pour out your heart to God. Now the main scripture is Proverbs 4:23. Guard your heart, it's the wellspring of life. And if you think of Matthew 18 and the unforgiving servant, Jesus canceled the debt on the cross. Forgive others. Forgive your colleagues. Forgive those who've shown a lack of trust in you. Are you willing to look in the middle now? You are asked to forgive. It's a command in scripture, but trust is another thing. It'll take time and not necessarily come right immediately. But what is happening to you is your heart is getting worse in compassion fatigue because you're being eaten up by your own issues and your relationships. So finally, are you willing to put that ugly shark hook on the altar with the name of the offender or give the hurt to Jesus and say, please be the vindicator. Please help me by my testimony, by my life, by my dedication to win back the trust of my colleagues. So you go out for reconciliation, but you walk free because the Lord is going to be your vindicator. So that is fresh start. And that's the first thing. You need to guard your heart. You need healing yourself. And the person needs to be able to go through this and see the misconceptions and be able to ask God to heal.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you so much for that. I've placed a link in the chat box if our audience wants to go and just explore that further. It sounds like a serious heart issue. It can really affect all the relationships in our lives because we tend to then isolate when we find ourselves in that space of compassion fatigue. And Prof. Joubert, what is the role of collaborative and trusting relationships in the prevention of
Thank you, Nicolene. Yes, but I think it's extremely important, that question. I want to add to that question, what is the role of collaborative and loving relationships in prevention of compassion fatigue? And so how do we show compassion and keep emotional balance? Part of my answer will actually follow up on Bev's answer. So the first part of this answer is that with your client, you need to work in a collaborative and loving way. That's the first step to prevent compassion fatigue. So it's not you providing all the answers, you solving all the problems, you being the rescuer. It is you coming alongside the client, paying full attention, listening to who the client is, listening to the whole story, so that you can respond to the needs of the client in a good way, in an effective way, and provide a safe space for the client to actually share the pain and all the trauma. If that is the first step, so in that relationship, that's the foundation of showing compassion, and for the client to feel safe and pour out the hurt and the pain. They need to trust you. So the trust relationship is number one. But the second aspect of this for me is that we need the colleagues. So what I've added here is that this collaborative relationship with a client is one part of the work we do. But if we can have a supervisor that's understanding the work we do, or work in a team and share some of that pain with the permission of the client, it does help. So you as the caregiver, pouring out the love and the care and the compassion, taking on or sharing the pain of the client, you're not alone in this. You're not alone. So it's that isolation that you mentioned, because that's what caregivers do when they become fatigued, they tend to isolate and hide away. So if you're in a group, if you have a supervisor, that burden is shared. So for me, that's the buffer, both sides. That's the buffer against compassion fatigue. And if you work with a collaborative, loving relationship with your client within a context where you have loving relationships, support networks, a strong support networks, stable support networks, that will help a caregiver to maintain emotional balance and prevent compassion fatigue.
Oh, that is so valuable. Thank you for that, Prof. Joubert. Now, Dr. Shaun, imagine now we work closely together, which we sometimes do in our environment. And let's pretend you are all noticing I am losing my marbles. I'm falling off the rails. It is a little bit more crazy than usual in that sense. And I'm portraying all these signs, but I'm isolating myself and I become withdrawn, almost like a personality change. And all of you in the room realize, oh my goodness, Idalette is suffering from compassion fatigue. Now, how will you deal with me? How can you pull me out of that isolation? What will you do, Dr. Shaun? Let me test you on that.
Sure, that's a very tough question, Idalette, because I wouldn't know the difference of when you're being your normal self or not being your normal self.
Touche. Thanks for your honesty.
So, but I hear your question and we'll role play it. So I think just to note that in our audience today, we have students, we have lecturers, we have colleagues, we have staff, we have people who are interested. We have maybe persons who have been exposed to this or been through it themselves. So you in some way or another have been affected by this. And I think one of the first things we can do when we notice someone showing signs of compassion fatigue is to listen to them. I think at best of times, just listening to someone is very helpful. So when they're speaking, to listen, to avoid interrupting, don't offer unsolicited advice, a challenge. And it's not just a gender thing, male, female thing, it's a temperament thing. I know of many men who also offer a lot of advice. So the point is just listen. Listen to what the person is saying. The second thing is validate their feelings. Let them know that you understand or you're trying to understand their emotions and experiences. Phrases like, that sounds really tough. Or I can imagine how difficult that must be. Helps them realize that, hey, I'm not alone in this, that maybe I'm not so weird or strange. There's something that someone else is also recognizing. Then encourage, and Prof. Joubert did touch on this, encourage self-care. And I think Bev did as well. Remind them of the importance of taking care of themselves. Suggest some activities that they might enjoy. For some people, they find that they top up. They become more peaceful. They replenish when they spend time in nature. I know the well-known Eugene Peterson, he would spend a Saturday Sabbath with his wife, and the two of them would hike in the mountains. And that would be his time of replenishing. Practicing mindfulness, and that's more contemporary secular term. In Christian terms, we could also say biblical meditation, or engaging in hobbies. I know when I was diagnosed with my extreme burnout and depression, one of the things that kept me going actually was running. I didn't give up running, and that helped lift up the dopamine, the serotonin. Even though on other issues I would lock myself in the room and not want to see anyone and be in the dark, that was a moment of getting some of those things back. The fourth thing we can do is offer practical support. Like we might offer, can I run an errand for you, or can I cook a meal, or can I take your child to school, or help with something. Now the challenge with this is often we say, and we've done this also with someone who's maybe lost a loved one, we say, let me know when you need help. Generally people don't. So it's kind of like you have to step in there and bring the food. And a very practical thing, like if you're going to bring a meal to someone, really do it in containers that they don't have to worry about returning to you. So I know of some people, they buy those tin foil things with the cardboard, and then the person, they're already not in a good state of mind now to still have to wash and remember who gave me what. Just adds to the angst. So just making it really easy. And if you really can't do the tin foil and cardboard, do the thing as my Indian brothers and sisters do, and I've learned to, that 2-liter ice cream container can do the job. Okay, next thing, connect them with resources. If they're struggling to cope, it's really important to suggest that they look for professional help from a therapist to a counselor, and particularly someone who might be skilled or more specialized in compassion fatigue, although I believe all counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists are well affair with this topic. And number 6, be patient. The recovery takes some time. Be understanding during the process. And I've just got another 2. Number 7, set boundaries. It's important to have boundaries to help them avoid becoming overwhelmed. And I had a chat with someone earlier yesterday and today, and just said to them, your default answer needs to be no unless yes is required for this next season. Your answer needs to be no so that you can create breathing room in your life. And then the last one, avoid judgment. Um, we all have found ourselves in some precarious places, some of our own doing, some not. Remember, compassion fatigue is a serious condition and it can affect anyone. So that's what I would recommend to you, Idalet, or anyone else who showed signs of compassion fatigue.
Thank you. I especially like the part of the meals and the food being prepped for me. I really appreciate your practical advice on that. And as you spoke about judgment, we often look at other Christians and say, no, this is not biblical. The way you are feeling is not Christian. It's not biblical. But we do find that there are examples of people who have experienced burnout in the Bible. Elijah for one. So what are some of the biblical perspectives on compassionate care? Dr. Shaun, if you can just share briefly on that for us.
Okay, I would say that the key verse that I would go to is Psalm 145, verse 8, which says, "The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and rich in love." So from a biblical point of view, we can take comfort in this, that we have a compassionate God. And he would like us as his children and as his creatures to share that compassion with one another. And you know what's amazing? We don't live with credit card Christianity. God doesn't ask us to give what we don't have. We don't give compassion on overdraft or on credit. We give because we've received. Because he's been compassionate to us, we are able to be compassionate to others. Now, there are key biblical perspectives. The one is God is compassionate, and as the triune God, he wants us to live in that kind of koinonia of fellowship of compassion. The other one is loving your neighbor as yourself. Most of us are a lot more compassionate with ourselves than what we are with other people. There are some exceptions, but we tend to judge others' actions by our intentions. So we tend to be a little bit less harsh with ourselves. And so how about being compassionate to others in the same way we tend to be with ourselves? And then another area is serving the needy. When we share, our means, our time, our resources, when we share the soup kitchen or something, we are also showing compassion to others. And then forgiveness is an interesting perspective, biblical theme of showing compassion to those that have wronged us. Now, some examples in the Bible, we have the Good Samaritan who was compassionate to someone else. There's Jesus' ministry. I think of the man who said, "If you want to, you can heal me." And the Lord said, "Yes, I do want to." I think of the early church. The Christians were known for their compassion. I think of the bubonic plague, how they went in and collected the bodies when others wouldn't. There's church history showing this. And then you mentioned it, the prophet Elijah. He showed compassion for the widow of Zarephath by providing her with food during the time of famine. So those are some examples from a biblical perspective of compassion.
Thank you, Dr. Shaun. Bev, just link to that for me, please, for all of us. When we talk about constructive ways to actually give and receive compassionate care, can you just give us another perspective, please?
Certainly. And I'm thinking of children, particularly in this case, where people are caring for marginalized children, to take them along with you to have fun, a little bit of distraction. If you're mentally tired, it's good to do some physical exercise. And if you're physically tired, mental exercise to make sure you're properly hydrated, to make space for yourself. This is similar to what Shaun has been saying, but there are other things like following a routine, making sure you have enough sleep. It helps your heart rate, all sorts of things like that. The Evergreen Clinic in Colorado has the stop, structure and routine, quality time, sometimes just listening or just reading or getting time out. O is organized activity, so a hobby. And then the P is parental care or substitute care. If you feel that you can't cope with something, you need a helper. You need a person to come in for you, and you can always help them when they are in need. I would like to say that you need to be consistent. If you find you jumping, you've got mood swings, you need to look at yourself and say, there's something not quite right here. I'm not feeling stable at the moment. So those things that can calm you are necessary. Find positives in relationships. In other words, don't go and speak to a person who's always moaning about life. Go to a person who will uplift you. There are so many ways, but you do need to talk with the people where there's a conflict. You do need to negotiate. You do need to speak out your heart, but not personally, but about issues to be good for the well-being for everybody in the group. So those are just some thoughts. Oh, yes, and I've got a questionnaire that I've sent to Idalette. It's linked to what Nicolene shared, and that is a secondary traumatic stress survey from LAM International, and it asks you a number of questions, some mixed up positives and negatives, and then you can analyze your answers. And so it's a good idea to work out where you're at. Thanks.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, our audience can go and just research that for themselves, LAM International, and find some resources there. But as you were talking about, putting ourselves in a different environment, having a look at what we surround ourselves with, what we listen to, what we see, what we look at. Dr. Joubert, I think you can just enlighten us as to what global compassion fatigue is and how does that affect us?
Yes, thank you for that. That's also a very important aspect to look at, especially as we've been through COVID-19 recently. Global compassion fatigue is the process by which individuals experience extreme preoccupation and tension because of concern for those affected by global events. Without being directly exposed to it, or without working directly with it. So it's not through clinical intervention, it's just by listening and hearing and being exposed to global events, and then get extremely preoccupied and tense about it, and then eventually fatigued. That's global compassion fatigue. It's closely related to compassion fatigue, of course, but it's a little bit more difficult to treat because it's more indirect. Compassion fatigue you can relate it directly to what the person is doing, the work environment, but when it becomes a global compassion fatigue issue, it's more indirect, and it can have negative consequences on the individuals' lives and their families and their work situations. You can imagine if they become very preoccupied with this trauma going on in the world. Social media has increased the risk, or is increasing the risk, of developing global compassion fatigue. With COVID-19, we've seen it, that the constant sharing of information, experiences, and also not all of it was relevant or valid, did make it worse for people, the people that were exposed to it and started to feel very tense about it. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of research on how it impacted healthcare workers, but the indication is that it heightened psychological issues, heightened anxiety, heightened, I don't want to say fear, but heightened depression or hopelessness more, and feeling helpless in this vast sort of arena of trauma, and not being in control, losing agency. News, like I say, the news and social media did have a negative effect, or can have a negative effect. Some people experience it as positive, because they said people are sharing emotions and they could identify with it, as well as learning about it, gaining, they got information about what's happening in other countries. So there's also a positive effect, or there can be a positive effect in sharing emotions or sharing about global events. And so I think to come back to how do we handle it, it needs to be managed. So you need to manage your news and social media exposure to prevent global compassion fatigue. You need to make sure that you engage in meaningful conversations on social media and put limits on how much you want to take in and listen to, and not isolate yourself emotionally, like we've mentioned before. I think it's really important. And be engaged in positive, constructive activities. And Shaun mentioned hobbies and a constructive relationship. So I think those aspects are also factors that can help us to prevent global compassion fatigue.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Prof. Joubert. Some of us don't really realize the impact of the negativity around us and of all the crises that we see on TV and the news and the hurricanes and people starving and suffering. And it does have an effect on us, and as caregivers especially, because we do tend to take on the problems, and we feel deeply about the suffering of others. And it's so important for us, all the caregivers in the room today, we invite you to do some introspection. Just sit for a little bit, look deep inside, and just discover which areas of your life need a touch from the Holy Spirit to revive you again, to just bring you back to balance. What does that balance look like for you in your life? Where is the fun aspects that Bev spoke about? Where are the relationships that Prof. Joubert spoke about? And how can we identify those signs in our own lives and those that we work closely with, as Dr. Shaun shared? Let us consider that and really become more self-aware and just take care of ourselves. I think the self-care aspect has gone so viral and so out there that it seems such an inward perspective. But when we do pour out ourselves in ministry to others and we care so deeply, we need to go back to that place where we get filled up again with Jesus, the water of life and the sustenance that will keep us going.